The origins of Hang High trace back to the mid-1960s when Clint Eastwood, fresh from his explosive success in Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, sought to establish himself as a major Hollywood force, no longer just an actor but a creative power with control over his projects. While the good, the bad, and the ugly had cemented his status as an international star, the Italian-produced spaghetti westerns were still looked down upon in Hollywood, with many studio executives considering them inferior to the American westerns of John Ford and Howard Hawks. Eastwood, however, recognized that the spaghetti western's gritty, stylized approach had revitalized the genre, and he was determined to bring that sensibility to American cinema. Around this time, a script titled Hang 'em High landed on his desk, written by Leonard Freeman, a screenwriter known for his work in television. The story centered on a man who is wrongly lynched but survives, then becomes a lawman seeking justice against the men who left him for dead. It was a brutal and morally complex tale, a stark contrast to the idealized, black-and-white morality of classic westerns, and Eastwood saw its potential immediately. However, there was a problem. No major Hollywood studio was willing to gamble on him as a leading man without a big-name director attached. Clint, having worked with Leone, wanted to maintain his newfound autonomy and refused to surrender creative control. At the same time, he had another dilemma. He needed a major American film to transition from European productions back into Hollywood, proving that his success wasn't limited to Italian-made westerns. Taking matters into his own hands, Eastwood reached out to Hollywood executives, pitching the film as an American spaghetti western, blending Leone's visual style with a more traditional western structure. His persistence led him to producer Leonard Freeman, who was just as eager to make the movie happen but faced difficulty securing financial backing. Eastwood, determined to move forward, used his growing star power to gain the attention of United Artists, a studio willing to take risks on unconventional projects. However, the studio executives were hesitant, concerned that Eastwood's image was too tied to the man with no name character from Leone's films. To distance Hang 'em High from spaghetti westerns while retaining their grittiness, they emphasized that this would be a more Americanized story with legal themes and a stronger moral center. Another significant influence on the film was a real-life historical case known as the Fort Smith hanging judge, Isaac Parker, a U.S. federal judge famous for sentencing criminals to death by hanging. Freeman incorporated elements of Parker's judicial philosophy into the film's narrative, crafting a story that questioned the ethics of capital punishment and the fine line between justice and revenge. As the film's concept evolved, it became clear that Eastwood's involvement wasn't just as an actor. He was making key creative decisions and positioning himself as more than just a performer. Unlike Leone's films, where he was a gunman operating outside the law, Hang 'em High would present him as a former victim-turned-lawman, adding a different kind of depth to his character. This was a crucial move for Eastwood, as it allowed him to expand his acting range beyond the silent, mysterious figures he had played in Italy. With a strong concept in place, a determined lead actor, and a script that balanced raw vengeance with legal themes, Hang 'em High was finally starting to take shape. However, Eastwood and Freeman still had to find a director who would align with their vision, assemble a compelling cast, and convince Hollywood executives that a western with spaghetti western influences could succeed in the American market. The next step in the film's journey was turning the script into a fully realized production, and that process would come with its own set of challenges. The journey from concept to screenplay for Hang 'em High was anything but smooth, as the project faced numerous hurdles before finding a home with a willing studio. Leonard Freeman had crafted a powerful script, blending elements of historical justice with the revenge-driven narratives that had dominated spaghetti westerns, but the challenge was convincing Hollywood that it was worth producing. At the time, American westerns were in decline, overshadowed by the stylized violence and revisionist themes of Italian westerns, yet major studios were hesitant to embrace this new wave. Clint Eastwood, despite his rising international fame, was still seen as an untested lead in Hollywood since all his major successes had been overseas. When Eastwood pitched Hang 'em High to major studios, executives expressed skepticism, believing that the film's morally ambiguous themes would struggle with mainstream American audiences. Traditional westerns followed clear-cut lines of good versus evil, whereas Hang 'em High blurred those distinctions, introducing a protagonist who, though technically on the right side of the law, pursued justice in a way that could easily be mistaken for vengeance. This complexity made studios wary, fearing that audiences would be unable to connect with a hero whose morality was in question. Undeterred, Eastwood and Freeman refined the script, emphasizing its broader themes of justice and authority, particularly the controversial nature of capital punishment in the American frontier. Freeman's research into Judge Isaac Parker's legacy helped shape the film's exploration of the power and limitations of the legal system, making it more than just another revenge western. However, the script needed further revisions to balance these heavier themes with action and tension, ensuring it remained commercially viable. As they worked on these changes, Eastwood sought financial backing from Warner Brothers, Paramount, and MGM, but all three studios passed on the project, deeming it too violent and cynical. The breakthrough finally came when United Artists, a studio known for taking risks on unconventional projects, expressed interest. Unlike the bigger studios, United Artists had a history of betting on films that challenged traditional Hollywood formulas, and they saw potential in Hang 'em High. However, even they had conditions. First, the film needed an experienced director to reassure investors that the project was in capable hands. Eastwood, who had worked with auteur director Sergio Leone on the Dollars trilogy, was accustomed to a highly stylized, European approach to filmmaking, but United Artists wanted someone with a more traditional Hollywood sensibility. They suggested Ted Post, a director who had worked extensively in television, including episodes of Rawhide, the Western series that had originally launched Eastwood's career. While Post was not a household name in film, he had a reputation for professionalism, efficiency, and being able to work within tight budgets, qualities that made him a reliable choice for the studio. Eastwood, initially hesitant about working with a director who lacked feature film experience, agreed to meet with Post, and the two found common ground. Post respected Eastwood's understanding of the genre and was willing to give him significant creative input, making the collaboration viable. With the director in place, United Artists officially greenlit the film, allocating a budget of $1.6 million. Modest by Hollywood standards, but significantly more than the budgets of Leone's spaghetti westerns. This was a critical moment for Eastwood, as it marked his first leading role in an American production and gave him greater control over his career than ever before. To further distinguish Hang 'em High from the spaghetti westerns that had made him famous, the studio encouraged subtle changes to the screenplay, refining dialogue and character interactions to align more with American storytelling conventions. The final script maintained the film's hard-edged realism but softened some of the more extreme revenge elements to ensure Eastwood's character remained sympathetic. It also introduced a romantic subplot, albeit one that remained secondary to the film's primary themes of justice and retribution. With the script locked in and United Artists backing the project, the next step was assembling the right cast to bring the story to life. Eastwood, eager to work with strong character actors, played a key role in casting, ensuring that every role was filled with talent that could elevate the film's dramatic weight. The casting process would not only determine the success of the film but also define the chemistry of the characters, and finding the perfect balance would prove to be another challenge. With the script finalized and United Artists backing the film, the next major hurdle for Hang 'em High was assembling the right cast and crew. Clint Eastwood, now deeply involved in the film's creative direction, wanted to ensure that every role was filled with actors who could add depth to the story. His man-with-no-name persona from Sergio Leone's films had been defined by an intense, silent presence, but Hang 'em High required a more complex performance. His character, Jed Cooper, was not just a lone drifter but a man who had been wrongfully hanged and now wielded legal authority to exact justice. This meant that the film needed a strong supporting cast to help flesh out the world and create believable conflicts. One of the first casting decisions was Judge Adam Fenton, the authoritative yet morally conflicted magistrate who assigns Cooper his new role as a federal marshal. For this role, the filmmakers chose Pat Hingle, a respected character actor known for his ability to portray both warmth and rigidity. Hingle's performance as Fenton was crucial to the film, as his character represented the legal system's flaws. He believed in law and order, but his methods often led to questionable outcomes. His presence gave Hang 'em High an added weight, as it became clear that justice was not always fair, even when applied by those who claimed to uphold it. Next came the search for villains, as the film required a range of antagonists, from the men who wrongfully lynched Cooper to corrupt officials and outlaws who tested his resolve as a lawman. One of the key villains was Captain Wilson, the ringleader of the vigilantes who nearly killed Cooper in the opening scene. This role went to Ed Begley, an actor with a commanding screen presence, capable of embodying self-righteous cruelty. Begley's portrayal of Wilson added a layer of menace to the film's themes, making it clear that vigilantism, even when carried out under the guise of justice, was nothing more than an excuse for lawlessness. Another notable antagonist was Miller, played by Bruce Dern, a rising character actor known for his ability to portray sleazy, unpredictable villains. Dern's performance added a gritty realism to the film, as his character was not a mastermind but an opportunist, highlighting how the West was filled with men who thrived on chaos. To further flesh out the world, the filmmakers needed a strong ensemble of supporting characters, including the federal marshals who worked alongside Cooper. Ben Johnson, a former rodeo cowboy turned actor, was cast as Marshal Dave Bliss, a fellow lawman who provided a contrast to Cooper's relentless pursuit of justice. Johnson's presence grounded the film in authenticity, as his real-life cowboy experience made his performance as a seasoned lawman feel genuine. Meanwhile, Charles McGraw was cast as Schmidt, a grizzled and cynical marshal who viewed the job as nothing more than a way to make a living. His character added an interesting dynamic to the film, as he served as a reminder that not all lawmen were noble. Some were just doing what they had to do to survive. One of the most challenging roles to cast was Rachel Warren, the film's lone female lead. Unlike the European spaghetti westerns, which often sidelined women entirely, Hang 'em High included a subplot involving Rachel, a woman whose family had been murdered and who sought justice through Cooper. The role ultimately went to Inger Stevens, a Swedish-born actress known for her work in dramatic roles. Stevens brought a sense of quiet strength to Rachel, making her more than just a love interest. She was a character who had suffered just as much as Cooper, but in a different way. Her performance helped humanize the film's darker themes, showing that vengeance was not the only response to injustice. Tragically, Stevens' career was cut short when she died by suicide just a few years after the film's release, making her performance in Hang 'em High one of her most memorable roles. Behind the camera, the crew was carefully selected to balance Eastwood's desire for spaghetti western-style visuals with Hollywood's more traditional approach. Director Ted Post, who had worked with Eastwood before on Rawhide, was a practical choice, as he had experience directing on tight schedules and knew how to get strong performances out of his actors. While Post was not as visually experimental as Leone, he understood how to frame a story efficiently, ensuring that the film moved at a steady pace without unnecessary scenes. The cinematographer, Richard H. Klein, was chosen for his ability to shoot expansive western landscapes while maintaining a gritty, realistic tone. Unlike Leone's films, which relied on extreme close-ups and dramatic wide shots, Klein's cinematography for Hang 'em High emphasized a more straightforward, American-style visual approach, with crisp framing and a focus on natural lighting. The film's production design was another critical element, as the filmmakers wanted to create a world that felt authentic yet slightly larger than life. The town of Fort Grant, where much of the film takes place, was constructed as a detailed western set, complete with a courthouse, saloons, and gallows, the latter being one of the film's most important visual elements. The gallows were designed to be imposing and ominous, reinforcing the film's themes of justice and execution. The wardrobe department also played a crucial role in distinguishing Hang 'em High from spaghetti westerns. While Leone's films often featured exaggerated, almost theatrical costumes, Hang 'em High aimed for a more traditional American Western look, with dust-covered jackets, worn-out hats, and practical holsters that reflected the reality of frontier life. With the cast and crew in place, Hang 'em High was finally ready to begin filming. However, while the script was strong and the actors were committed, the actual production would prove to be an entirely new challenge. The shooting schedule was tight, the budget was limited, and the pressure was immense. This was Eastwood's first major American Western, and if it failed, his career momentum could come to a grinding halt. The next phase of the film's journey would involve long days on location, unexpected difficulties, and the challenge of bringing the vision of Hang 'em High to life under intense conditions. With the cast and crew assembled, Hang 'em High entered production in late 1967, marking Clint Eastwood's first American Western as a leading man. While he had faced the grueling conditions of filming in Spain for Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, this production came with its own unique set of challenges. The budget, though higher than what Leone had worked with, was still relatively modest for a Hollywood film, meaning that efficiency was critical. Director Ted Post was tasked with keeping the production on schedule and ensuring that every shot counted. Eastwood, ever the professional, brought his European set work ethic with him. He had learned from Leone to keep multiple takes to a minimum and to maintain an intense focus on every scene. This approach would prove essential, as the film's tight schedule left little room for error. One of the first major challenges was the opening sequence, in which Eastwood's character, Jed Cooper, is wrongfully lynched by a group of vigilantes. The scene needed to be shocking and visceral, immediately drawing the audience into the brutal world of frontier justice. To achieve this, the production team designed a practical effect where Eastwood would actually be hoisted into the air by a noose. Safety precautions were put in place, but Eastwood insisted on doing as much of the stunt as possible himself to ensure authenticity. The crew used a hidden harness system that took most of the pressure off his neck, but there was still a risk of injury. During the first take, something went wrong with the rigging, and Eastwood briefly blacked out, hanging for several seconds before the crew rushed to lower him. Though he recovered quickly, The incident underscored the dangers of practical effects in Western filmmaking. The film's primary shooting locations included various spots in California and Arizona, with the town of Fort Grant built as a dedicated set for the movie. Unlike Leone's exaggerated, almost mythical Western landscapes, the filmmakers wanted Hang 'em High to feel grounded in reality. This meant shooting in dusty, sun-bleached towns that reflected the harshness of frontier life. The cinematographer, Richard H. Klein, worked to capture the natural beauty of the American West while maintaining a rough, unforgiving atmosphere. Scenes were often shot in natural light, emphasizing the contrast between wide-open landscapes and the claustrophobic interiors of jails and courtrooms. This approach reinforced the film's themes. Justice in the West was a battle between law and lawlessness, between the open range and the rigid structures of civilization. Filming the hanging scenes proved to be one of the production's most complex and grueling aspects. Since the movie revolves around the theme of capital punishment, several sequences involved gallows, executions, and public hangings. One of the most elaborate scenes featured multiple criminals being hanged simultaneously in front of a large crowd, requiring extensive coordination between actors, stunt performers, and technical crews. Special effects teams devised intricate harnesses and trapdoor mechanisms to make the hangings look realistic while keeping the actors safe. These scenes were filmed over several days, with intense heat and dust making conditions uncomfortable for everyone involved. Eastwood, who had endured extreme conditions filming in Spain, was used to such difficulties, but for many of the actors, the relentless heat and long hours were exhausting. The film's action sequences also presented significant challenges. Unlike traditional Hollywood westerns, which often featured carefully choreographed gunfights with clean, heroic action, Hang 'em High aimed for a more brutal, realistic approach. Gunfights were fast and dirty, with characters rarely walking away unscathed. To ensure authenticity, the film employed experienced stunt coordinators, and Eastwood performed many of his own stunts. One particularly intense sequence involved Cooper tracking down one of his would-be lynchers, leading to a desperate struggle on horseback. The scene required Eastwood to ride at full gallop, leap from his horse, and engage in a brutal fistfight, all while the cameras rolled in real time. Though he had trained extensively in horseback riding, the scene was physically demanding, and multiple takes were needed to get it right. One of the most unexpected difficulties came from working with animals. Westerns often rely heavily on horses, and Hang 'em High was no exception. However, horses are notoriously unpredictable on set, and several delays were caused by uncooperative animals. In one instance, a horse meant to rear up dramatically during a chase scene refused to follow commands, forcing the crew to reset and reshoot multiple times. In another case, a scene in which Eastwood's character was supposed to calmly ride into town nearly ended in disaster when his horse got spooked by a sudden noise, nearly throwing him off. Despite these challenges, the crew adapted quickly, and post worked to minimize delays by shooting alternative angles whenever possible. The working relationship between Eastwood and Post was another crucial aspect of the production. While they had previously collaborated on Rawhide, this was their first time working together on a major feature film. Eastwood, having observed Leone's directorial style, was beginning to develop his own instincts as a filmmaker, and he often had strong opinions about how scenes should be shot. Post, a more traditional Hollywood director, was sometimes at odds with Eastwood's vision. On several occasions, Eastwood pushed for longer, more atmospheric takes that allowed tension to build naturally, whereas Post preferred a more conventional, tightly edited approach. While their disagreements never escalated into full-blown conflicts, there was a clear sense that Eastwood was beginning to chafe under the constraints of working with a director who had final say. This experience would later influence his decision to start directing his own films, as he realized that having full creative control was essential to executing his vision. The final weeks of production were focused on bringing together the film's key emotional beats, particularly the scenes between Eastwood's character and Judge Fenton. Pat Hingle, a veteran of stage and screen, brought an intensity to his role that helped elevate the film beyond a simple revenge story. His courtroom monologues, in which he justified his harsh sentences, became some of the most memorable moments in the film. Eastwood, in contrast, played his role with quiet restraint, creating a compelling dynamic between the two characters, one representing the rigid, merciless application of the law, and the other struggling to reconcile personal vengeance with justice. By the time filming wrapped, the cast and crew had endured long days, harsh conditions, and technical difficulties, but the footage they had captured was strong. The next challenge was taking everything they had shot and shaping it into a cohesive, gripping film. Post-production would determine the pacing, tone, and final impact of Hang 'em High, and it was during this phase that the film's music, editing, and final touches would come together. As the film entered the editing room, the pressure was on to create a final product that would resonate with audiences and establish Eastwood as a legitimate American movie star. With principal photography wrapped, Hang 'em High entered the critical post-production phase, where raw footage would be shaped into a cohesive, gripping Western. The editing process was crucial, not only to refine the pacing and structure of the film but also to ensure that it struck the right balance between action, drama, and thematic depth. Unlike the spaghetti westerns Clint Eastwood had starred in, which often featured long, drawn-out sequences with minimal dialogue, Hang 'em High needed a tighter, more traditionally American flow. Director Ted Post and editor Gene Milford worked closely to maintain the film's momentum while preserving the brooding tension that made the story so compelling. One of the first challenges in the editing room was structuring the film's opening sequence, the attempted lynching of Jed Cooper. The scene had been shot with multiple angles, including extreme close-ups of Cooper's face, the tightening noose, and the vigilante's expressions of self-righteous conviction. The goal was to make the audience feel the visceral horror of a man being executed without trial, while also foreshadowing the film's exploration of justice and revenge. Post and Milford experimented with different cuts, ultimately deciding to intercut shots of Cooper's struggling with quick, jarring cuts of the rope tightening and the horse being driven away beneath him. The result was a shocking, almost suffocating moment that immediately gripped the audience. To enhance the impact, they chose to slightly extend the moment before Cooper is rescued, making viewers believe for a few extra seconds that he might actually die. As the editing continued, another major focus was the film's gunfights. Unlike the highly stylized, almost operatic shootouts of Leone's westerns, Hang 'em High aimed for a more realistic, grounded approach. Eastwood's character wasn't an invincible gunslinger but a determined lawman forced into dangerous situations. The gunfights were designed to feel quick, brutal, and decisive, reflecting the harsh realities of frontier justice. Editor Gene Milford used sharp, precise cuts to maintain intensity without resorting to excessive slow motion or drawn-out exchanges. Sound editing played a crucial role as well. Every gunshot was given weight and impact, ensuring that the violence felt immediate and dangerous rather than exaggerated. Beyond the action sequences, the film's dialogue-heavy courtroom and jailhouse scenes required careful pacing to maintain engagement. Pat Hingle's performance as Judge Fenton was particularly critical, as his long speeches about law and order could have slowed the film down if not handled correctly. To keep these moments compelling, the editors employed subtle reaction shots, cutting between Fenton's stern, commanding presence and Eastwood's quiet, simmering intensity. This created a visual rhythm that maintained tension, making it clear that even when characters weren't firing guns, they were engaged in battles of ideology and principle. Once the picture was locked, the next challenge was crafting the film's musical score. Music played an enormous role in westerns, setting the emotional tone and reinforcing the film's themes. For Hang 'em High, composer Dominic Frontiere was brought in to create a score that would distinguish the film from both classic Hollywood westerns and the spaghetti westerns that had defined Eastwood's career up to that point. Frontiere had experience scoring films and television shows, known for his ability to blend traditional orchestration with modern, innovative touches. The challenge was finding the right musical identity for Hang 'em High. Leone's Dollars trilogy had been defined by Ennio Morricone's groundbreaking, experimental scores, which used whistles, gunshots, and electric guitars to create an otherworldly atmosphere. United Artists, however, wanted Hang 'em High to feel more like a traditional American Western, more sweeping and orchestral, yet still dramatic and intense. Frontiere crafted a score that combined bold, brassy themes with darker, more ominous melodies, reflecting the film's themes of justice and revenge. The main title theme, with its powerful, rising motif, immediately set the tone for the film, heroic yet tinged with menace, reinforcing the idea that law and order in the Old West was never black and white. One of the most important musical sequences was the final confrontation, where Jed Cooper tracks down the last of his would-be lynchers. The score had to build tension without overpowering the scene, guiding the audience's emotions without making the outcome feel predictable. Frontiere employed a mix of deep percussion and urgent strings, creating a sense of impending reckoning. This musical approach helped elevate the film's climax beyond a simple shootout, making it feel like the resolution of a larger moral conflict. Sound design was another crucial aspect of post-production. Westerns rely heavily on environmental sounds, horses galloping, the creak of leather, the wind sweeping across the plains, to create an immersive experience. The sound editing team carefully layered these elements, ensuring that every scene felt alive. Gunshots were recorded and mixed to have a distinct, sharp impact, avoiding the artificial hollow sounds that had been common in earlier westerns. Even the gallows scene was given extra attention, with the creak of the wooden platform and the snap of the trapdoor adding to the unsettling realism of the execution sequences. As post-production neared completion, the final step was test screenings. United Artists wanted to gauge audience reactions before finalizing the film's release strategy. The initial test screenings were promising. Audiences responded well to Eastwood's performance, appreciating the mix of action and moral complexity. However, some viewers found the film's ending too abrupt, leading to minor revisions in the editing room. The final cut of the film ran approximately 114 minutes, striking a balance between action-packed pacing and deeper thematic exploration. With the editing and scoring complete, Hang 'Em High was finally ready for release. The marketing campaign positioned it as Eastwood's return to American westerns, playing up his Dollars trilogy fame while emphasizing that this was a new kind of story, one rooted in American history and legal dilemmas rather than European fantasy. The film's promotional materials highlighted its darker, grittier tone, drawing comparisons to classics like High Noon while also acknowledging its spaghetti western influences. The trailers showcased its action sequences and dramatic tension, ensuring that audiences knew they were in for a gripping western experience. As Hang 'Em High prepared for its theatrical debut, the stakes were high, not just for Eastwood, but for the future of the western genre itself. If the film succeeded, it could prove that the American western was still viable, even as spaghetti westerns dominated international markets. If it failed, it could derail Eastwood's attempts to transition from an Italian cult star to a legitimate Hollywood leading man. With everything in place, all that remained was to see how audiences and critics would respond. With Hang 'Em High completed and ready for its theatrical release, United Artists and Clint Eastwood faced the final challenge: introducing the film to an audience and ensuring its success at the box office. The marketing strategy was crucial, as this film was not just any western. It was Eastwood's first major American film since his spaghetti western days, and it needed to break through the stereotypes associated with his previous roles. The promotional campaign would emphasize both his star power and the film's departure from the stylized violence of the Italian westerns, focusing instead on its themes of justice, retribution, and the blurred lines between right and wrong. United Artists worked closely with Eastwood to craft an advertising strategy that would speak to American audiences who were craving something different from the traditional western. The marketing materials highlighted the film's darker, more realistic take on the western genre. The promotional posters and trailers depicted Eastwood as the morally complex hero, standing alone in front of a haunting backdrop of the frontier. His steely gaze and worn appearance were featured prominently, reinforcing his status as the quintessential Western anti-hero but with a sense of vulnerability that made his character stand out. The tagline "Justice has a price" was emblazoned across the posters, tapping into the film's exploration of justice and vengeance and appealing to audiences who were interested in more than just shootouts. The promotional material also played on the film's gritty realism, distancing itself from the larger-than-life, mythic figures of other westerns. By focusing on the moral dilemmas faced by Eastwood's character, the campaign positioned Hang 'Em High as a film that would provoke thought, not just entertain. When the film was finally released in the summer of 1968, it found an eager audience. The timing was right. The Western genre, while still popular, was beginning to shift toward more gritty, revisionist takes, influenced by the social and cultural upheavals of the late 1960s. Hang 'Em High struck a balance between traditional Western action and more modern sensibilities, making it relevant to both older audiences who still loved the classic Western and younger viewers seeking something with more depth. Critics and audiences were intrigued by Eastwood's performance, which showed a more vulnerable side to his usual tough guy persona. While still the anti-hero, his portrayal of Jed Cooper as a man torn between vengeance and the pursuit of justice resonated with audiences. The film opened strong at the box office, proving that there was still a significant market for westerns with a more nuanced approach. The success of Hang 'Em High was also a personal victory for Eastwood, as it confirmed his transition from a cult figure in spaghetti westerns to a legitimate leading man in Hollywood. The film grossed over $6 million in its initial run, a solid return on its $1.6 million budget, and it proved that an American western could succeed without adhering to the conventions that had dominated the genre for decades. This financial success set the stage for Eastwood's future in Hollywood, solidifying his reputation as a box office draw and paving the way for his later films, many of which he would go on to direct himself. Critically, Hang 'Em High was generally well received, with praise directed at the film's performance, direction, and its subversion of Western tropes. Many critics lauded Eastwood's portrayal of a character who was not merely a classic Western hero but a man dealing with complex moral questions. The film's handling of capital punishment and the concept of frontier justice added layers of depth to a genre that had often been more focused on action and spectacle than on social issues. However, not all reviews were positive. Some critics felt that the film didn't entirely escape the formulaic traps of the genre, and that its attempts at moral depth sometimes felt forced. Still, the overall consensus was that Hang 'em High was an exciting and fresh take on the Western, and it demonstrated the potential of Clint Eastwood as both an actor and a creative force in Hollywood. As time passed, Hang 'em High continued to solidify its place in cinematic history. The film's success helped redefine the Western genre in the late 1960s and early 1970s, as filmmakers sought to explore more morally complex characters and storylines. The film's portrayal of a man seeking justice in a brutal and unforgiving world resonated with a changing America, where notions of right and wrong were being questioned more than ever. The themes of Hang 'em High, the blurred lines between justice and revenge, the flaws of the legal system, and the moral dilemmas faced by those in power, seemed increasingly relevant as the country grappled with issues such as civil rights, the Vietnam War, and the growing distrust in authority. For Clint Eastwood, Hang 'em High marked a turning point in his career. It was his first major American film in the Western genre after his success in Italy, and it allowed him to step into a more complex, nuanced role than the stoic gunfighters he had become known for. His portrayal of Jed Cooper became an early indication of the kinds of roles he would go on to play in his career, often exploring themes of justice, morality, and personal redemption. The success of the film led to a string of other successful westerns in the late 1960s and early 1970s, including The Outlaw Josie Wales and Pale Rider, which further solidified Eastwood's reputation as one of the leading stars of the genre. Hang 'em High also had a lasting impact on the Western genre itself. In many ways, it bridged the gap between the traditional Hollywood westerns of the 1950s and the more revisionist, morally ambiguous westerns that would dominate in the 1970s. Its exploration of themes like vigilantism, the flaws of the justice system, and the cost of revenge set the stage for later films like The Wild Bunch, 1969, and High Plains Drifter, 1973, which would further push the boundaries of what westerns could address. The film's success also demonstrated that the Western genre was far from dead. It could evolve and adapt to the changing cultural climate. In the years that followed, Hang 'em High became a staple of the Western genre and a key part of Clint Eastwood's legacy. The film was often included in discussions about the most influential westerns of the 1960s, alongside films like The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly and the Magnificent Seven. Its success also marked the beginning of a new era in Eastwood's career, one in which he would become not just a leading man but a director and producer, shaping the future of American cinema. The film's impact continued to be felt throughout Eastwood's career and in the broader Western genre, as filmmakers and audiences began to see that Westerns could be as complex and thought-provoking as any other genre of film. Today, Hang 'em High remains a significant and influential film, a milestone in both Clint Eastwood's career and the evolution of the Western genre. Its legacy endures not just as a classic of American cinema but as a symbol of the genre's ability to evolve and reflect the changing world around it. For Eastwood, it was a career-defining moment, a film that proved he could not only carry a movie as a leading man but also tackle complex themes and redefine what a Western could be.